It's
Sorry, had to hit that part.
6 o'clock. Let's get our workshop started. I'd like to call the workshop to order. First and only item on the agenda is forestation policy and agreements for the community as requested by Planning Board member Carolyn White. So, Carolyn, you still have the ball. Carolyn out there?
She is unmuted. She can comment if.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, indeed. Good. As the commercial would go.
I guess we'll jump right into it. And I guess the first thing I'd like to say is everybody did receive the document that I sent during the last planning board meeting. And without going through it step by step, I don't think we need to. I guess what I'd like to know is what's everybody's thought on the concept at this stage?
Okay, I'll entertain comments from the planning board members in attendance. Looking for a status report.
Nothing. That's funny. Okay, should we move on to the conservation efforts?
Go ahead, Emily.
This is Emily. The lack of comment was we had to request to be unmuted, Carolyn. It wasn't because we didn't want to talk about your thing.
Fun.
Just to interject, so we're working in a webinar format, and I met with Chris Shive, our IT personnel, a couple of times over how this works. If it's a little clunky, just you gonna make it, Ron?
Oh yeah.
Okay, glad to hear it.
Don't start cheering yet.
Emily, I apologize.
I don't.
Okay.
So all I was going to say about this topic was, the document that you sent, Carolyn, is really quite extensive, and I admit I haven't gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. My impression is that we might have some low-hanging fruit in the existing land development and subdivision regulations where we have opportunities to do some of the things that this draft that you sent accomplishes within sort of our existing framework, instead of creating something entirely new, as this document seems to suggest. And correct me if I'm mistaken there, but it seems like this is a draft for basically like a new ordinance, like a forest conservation ordinance. And so given that that's a complex undertaking, maybe it's not more complex than amending the land and subdivision regulations. I'd like to hear some input on that. But my impression is that there are certain places in those existing subdivision regs where we could potentially just beef up or insert some of the things you're trying to do with this ordinance. And so hearing from you, what are the main objectives that you want to achieve with this ordinance would be really helpful, especially if we do want to take maybe a lower effort approach. And this is not to diminish the amount of effort you put into it or the amount of effort that's required to see it through to a approved ordinance stage, but can we accomplish some of it with some amendments and then reassess and say, is an ordinance something that we do want to entertain if it's not sufficient going the amendment route? Those are my thoughts.
Okay. And my response to that is I'm a fan of low-hanging fruit. So, the intention, my intention for bringing this to the table is so that we are a community that is incented to preserve our trees and our forests and our landscaping and whatnot. We've got to maintain this rural character. And I don't think we push hard enough inside the existing ordinances to do that and to cover our bases. The long-term objective isn't just a Hopkinton issue the way I see it. It's a global issue, but I'm only worried about what we're doing here. And we neglect the actual conditions of a lot of the clear cutting that's actually going on in the state. I don't have a list of endangered trees. I haven't been able to find one in Rhode Island. I could get a list of champion trees, but what I'd like us to be able to do is to recognize what we do and don't do well while we're authorizing clear cutting of acres and acres of forest. Incenting people to pay attention to some type of guidance is what I would like to see happen. If there are excerpts from this document that we can insert into existing regs, I'm all for it. I don't want us to have to extend this effort any longer than we need to if the general consensus is that there's a better, faster, smarter way to get it done. So that's the kind of feedback that we should focus on. And, you know, if we can get the rest of the board to chime in along the same lines that Emily just brought to the table, I'd like to hear where we go. Do we have some consensus there?
So Al Diorio here. I very much like the idea of working within the existing framework to the extent possible, for no other reason that the framework is there. Creating a new mechanism is always more complicated. That said, that said, I don't want to dilute Carolyn's efforts here. So how about this as a strategy? How about if we start with retooling some existing language? Let's then stand back, take a look at it, see if it accomplishes Carolyn's objective. And if it does, let's kick it forward. If it doesn't, maybe we can go back and do a little bit more work on the existing language until we get it to the point where everybody's happy. What do you think?
I think that's a great opportunity for us. I'd also like to keep in mind that the conservation, the design conservation efforts, maybe we could have those discussions together and you know, bring us some of that into the fold, or is that truly an independent discussion that needs to be had later?
You know, Al Diorio, so my perspective on the whole conservation development idea is that this is a departure, a significant departure from the way we do business today. And if we want to go there, that's perfectly okay, but I think that's going to take significant effort.
Okay. Okay.
That is not to say that we can't take elements of that concept and get them into our existing ordinance. But keep in mind, I don't think it's not the same. So
Okay.
again, I'm just thinking, let's try and work within the existing framework to the greatest extent possible. And then at some point, listen, if the community decides that conservation design / development is the direction that they want to move in, then let's open that can, sure.
Okay. All right. So how do we get there? We haven't heard from Keith and Ron, John either.
So Ron is in, this is Talia, Ron is in attendance, Keith is not, and John is as well.
Okay.
Hi, this is John. I'm happy to weigh in. Again, I haven't gone through either of these documents with a fine tooth comb. And I know that I have to, it's just a lot of it. But at a high level, the concepts I agree with wholeheartedly. Preserving the rural character of the town, saving the forests that we all moved here for, that's high on my list. And so I'm behind it and I'm with you. And I also agree if it has to be a phased approach within existing frameworks, then let's knock it down into small phases and do it bit by bit.
Okay. All right. John, just so I can give you my true background on this was, during the noisy solar hearings that were going on throughout the town, some are still going on, I guess. It was noise of the neighbors, and we heard a lot of noise about the trees and the no-cut zones and all of that other stuff. And I was inspired to take their complaints into a positive direction and said, how can we take those concerns off the table when these matters come to the planning board or the town council? So that's ultimately what spawned my motivation to bring this to the table the way it is.
I completely agree. I've also witnessed the same unrest and I guess discomfort that residents have. And if we can make sure that planning happens in a way that is going to please the residents, I think it's a good move.
Yeah, in conjunction with our comp plan as well. I guess we're good to go. And Ron doesn't have anything to offer. Al, what would your approach be? Should we lean on some things that Emily said? She's got specific places in the regs where she'd like to see some content exploited and address some of the issues that we're looking at with this document that I brought to the table.
Yeah, Al Diorio, so listen, Emily invested some time here. My suggestion would be, let's take a look at her document. Let's see if the insertions that she's proposing make sense. And, let's start there. But I would like to
This is Ron.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Ron if he's got something to say.
Yeah, this is Ron. I'd just like to throw my 2 cents worth in here. This is a good thing that we're trying to accomplish here. First of all, John came up with an idea. He said, because of the rural character is why we moved here. Well, I can't get on that boat because I didn't move here. I was born here. I've been here 69 years. And the next thing is, maybe we should look at the old document and see what we don't like about it, instead of going through the whole multi-page, I don't want to use the word fiasco, it's not a fiasco, but going through the whole multi-page document and pick out the parts that need to be addressed, instead of just changing over to a whole new operation.
Yep. We're with you,
that's
Ron.
I mean, Carolyn and Emily have done a great amount of work, headed in a great direction. Let's not get off the course and pick out what we don't like about the old one, keep the things we do, just kind of fine tune it and come up with something that's going to work and benefit the whole town.
Okay.
Oh, Ron, Al Diorio again, just to be clear, when you start talking about the old document, are you suggesting that we go back and look at the proposed amendments of May 2006 and take out the things we don't like?
Well, the document that is in question, this is Ron again, the document that is in question, and I use those words in question, is the reason that this other wording is being brought forward. So there's got to be some reason why the wording is being brought forward. Do we want to just junk the whole thing? Do we want to just pick out the things we don't like? Do we want to fine tune them? I would think that would be our goal, to see what's what and who's who and work on it that way.
All right, so again, Al Diorio, this is a little bit different than what I envisioned here. if in fact we're referring to the May 2006 document, I had the opportunity to go through that again. I ran out of highlighter ink, scratching out the things that I didn't like. I don't want to go back to this document. It's intense. I would much prefer to springboard off of Emily's, sorry, Emily, I don't have a date on this, but the 3 or 4 or 5 page document that she has provided for this evening's workshop. That would be my proposal. Let's take a look at that language, see if we can legitimately insert it into our existing regs. Stand back, take a look at it, see if it works.
Okay, this is Ron again. My next question is, how do we all get the opportunity to look at Emily's document?
It should have been in your packet, if I'm not mistaken. Am I incorrect?
Let me go over it again and see if I overlooked something. That's entirely possible.
Okay, take a few minutes.
Well, don't hold up on my account. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, so again, Al Diorio, so the members, Emily, Carolyn, is everybody okay with moving forward with this idea?
Absolutely.
Yep, this is Emily, yes.
Okay. So Emily, you took the initiative here, and again, I appreciate that. You put together a document. You want to just lead the charge on this?
Sure. So the sort of impetus for this was at our last workshop, we ended the conversation by saying, how many more workshops do we want to have on this topic? We were kind of having fairly open discussion about forest conservation, and we had read the materials about conservation development, and we didn't really have a sense of direction about where we as a board were going to go. And I believe it was Al that sort of recommended, okay, first we had to look at Carolyn's document. A lot of us hadn't seen it at that point. So for the next meeting, let's send out Carolyn's document and I'll take a look at it. And then second, because I had expressed some specific ideas, Al asked that I take a look at the conservation development drafts from 2006 and kind of investigate if there is a way to insert some desirable elements of that into our current subdivision, land development and subdivision regulations, or other ways that we could just take out the pieces that we like and insert them in existing regulations. And so I'm kind of, I'm not reading, but I'm talking about my notes and context section in the document that's on page 1. The 2006 drafts had proposed changes to the land and subdivision regulations, to the comprehensive plan, and to the main zoning ordinance for the town. I kind of just took the comprehensive plan amendments part and the zoning ordinance and put it aside. I focused all of my attention on the land development and subdivision regulations, and were there things in that document that looked like places of opportunity to insert some conservation development language. I also acknowledged that the phrase or the term conservation development might be kind of like a trigger term for a lot of people. And if they saw that in the land development and subdivision regulations, developers might not like that and might not read anymore or think about developing in the town or whatever. So I didn't seek to insert those words into our regulations either. So I simply just went through the existing land development and subdivision regulations document that's on the town's website, and looked for places where we could insert some of that conservation development stuff. So I found first right off the bat that in Article 3, which is just this procedural overview is what it's called in the subdivision regs, there was a section called alternative development. Where deemed possible and practical, the planning board may require the submission of appropriate plans to demonstrate the feasibility of creating other types of subdivisions. If the planning board determines that such an alternative development is in the best interest of the town, the applicant may be required to develop the property in an approved alternative fashion. I interpret that to mean the planning board could require at least the consideration of plans that, for example, maximize open space. We could ask a developer to provide us with that type of plan. In our current subdivision regs, this is kind of like a cluster subdivision instead of a conventional subdivision. So we already have a section in the subdivision regs that talks about clustering development, clustering homes or houses or whatever, buildings in one part of a property and leaving open space in another part of the property. And that's a lot of what the conservation development sought to do as well.
Emily,
Yes.
excuse me. Hi, it's Maggie Hogan.
Hi.
Hi. So we've got a little bit of a point of order here that we need to focus on. I'm reviewing the agenda for tonight, and it says a discussion on the forestation policy and agreements for the community as requested by Carolyn Light. So to the extent that we're going off of a forestation policy into other areas, I'm not comfortable that that's adequately noticed on this agenda.
So Maggie, Al Diorio.
Yes.
What if I were to suggest that we were making our way toward reforestation? Does that get us back under the umbrella, or have we already strayed too far?
I'd say you've gone over the line presently, because we're talking about, as I am understanding the conversation, conservation design and amending subdivision regulations, and that was not noticed to the public.
Okay, let me phrase that a different way.
Okay.
So Carolyn's got, I'm going to do some paraphrasing here. Carolyn's got this idea of reforestation,
Yep.
which stated another way is striving to protect our natural resources. Conservation design at its root seeks to do the very same thing. Construct development around natural resources that are deemed worthy of protection. So to the extent that we might consider revisions to our subdivision regulations that get us close to that target, I don't necessarily see us getting too far afield, as long as we eventually circle back to the concept of protecting the natural resources. So I don't want to talk you out of a perspective. If we've gone too far, we've gone too far, but that's the way I'm looking at this.
It was a valiant effort, Al.
Okay.
Valiant indeed. As I've indicated to you, and it's probably a good time for the board to know, I pretty much am going to jump in there when I see you guys going afield, so to speak, and straying off of forestation policy, which is a document that we've received and presumably would have been available to the public to review. That's the only thing that's on this agenda. And it's unfortunate if you would like to discuss other things, but you really can't. I think you could say that things that you've said so far, that, okay, you know, can we possibly insert some of this stuff into subdivision regulations? That's fair game. But as we're getting into specifics of, you know, this particular element of the comprehensive plan as it pertains to these kinds of issues, whoop, we've gone off the track. We're not talking about a proposed forestation policy any longer. And you know, if you're going to have a continued discussion on this matter, you might want to include some additional bullet items on here, including, you know, how do subdivision regulations get amended vis-a-vis how do we adopt, you know, if this was actually to be a zoning ordinance that you would recommend to the town council. And those are all valid discussions, but they do have to be within the context because someone might not be very interested at all in the forestation policy, but they might be very interested in conservation design and would have tuned in. So those are my recommendations.
Very good. Well, listen, I'm certainly not going to go against your advice. I have too much respect for you. So, listen, if we're off track, we're off track. This would be an item that we would put on another agenda. So, as I understand your recommendation, we would either need to return to the specific document of reforestation or do something else, but not talk about, not move in the direction we're moving.
I think you can, you can talk about forestation in the context of this document. And you actually started out, or maybe it was Emily's, one of you had indicated, how about Carolyn, tell us, what were you trying to achieve with the proposed document? And that's the perfect conversation to have. And, the suggestion that, hey, listen, you know what? We could probably accomplish that, because there's places in the subdivision regs. Okay, that's pretty good. And if you went back to this document and said, okay, let's kind of pick out the highlights. So for instance, if you were to ask my opinion about this particular document, which you haven't, but if you were, I would suggest to you that it's super broad, super detailed, and probably overkill for what you're trying to accomplish from what I've heard. And it could be very well incorporated, your concepts, if they were distilled a little further, could in fact be incorporated into your subdivision. Your subdivision regulations, I gotta say, are pretty darn good. They don't cover all the topics, obviously, that you're contemplating here, but there's places for that to go in. So, I would direct you back to the document itself. You've got some time on the books here. Pull out the things that make sense to you and talk about whether they could best be incorporated elsewhere. And then that particular document, a document that apparently Emily has drafted, and I've got to say, I don't see it in my packet. It could be that it got mixed up with my sorting, but I'm going to double check.
I believe that I sent it out via email to the planning board.
Okay.
Nope, I stand corrected. I'll be all right.
I believe that that's what I did. I feel, I mean, I can't check my email right now while I'm in a
Right.
meeting, but I believe that I did forward that to the planning board.
Okay.
This is Emily. I received it in my packet and it is on the website with the materials for this
Okay.
meeting as well.
We'll double check my stack. I got a lot of stuff.
So let me jump onto that. Emily, if you're representing that this document, that is the document you prepared, is on the website for tonight's meeting. Maggie, does this allay any of your concerns? Or
Not
you-
really.
Are you
I hate to
fixated?
be a pain, but
No,
the agenda just talks about a specific document. It doesn't talk about, I don't know what the title of Emily's is, but it doesn't talk about a second document.
Okay, good. So whatever's on the agenda is what we're limited to. I get it. Okay, well, listen, with that advice, can we return to Carolyn's document
Yeah.
and sculpt out some items that we might then bring forward at another meeting under the topic of possible revisions to our subdivision rules. Can we do that?
This is Talia, and also if we were to have another workshop, we could just add Emily's document to that agenda as well. And then both things can be discussed.
Yes. So planning board members, how do we feel about that? Is that going to be acceptable?
Carolyn here. I think that's acceptable. And I know I've got a copy of Emily's document. Emily can actually go through her thoughts that are listed on the document and present them to us so that we can cover that part of the discussion that we had initiated earlier. Even though the document's not there, we could read them to the other people. That's, you know, she didn't write a book. She summed up everything pretty cleanly.
To the extent that they are addressing the forestation document, yes.
Yes.
To the extent that
Yes.
they're not addressing the forestation document, no.
Okay. Then, Emily, would you be okay with picking up over there?
Yeah, hi, this is Emily.
I guess
First-
it's your third page. Yeah.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
exactly. I'm not sure because it sounds like a lot of folks aren't familiar with the document, which is fine. I can sort of describe that in a second. One,
Yeah.
just to address the agenda issue, I think it would be great if the next agenda included explicitly an item that we could talk about how elements of the conservation development drafts that we received previously could be incorporated into our existing land and subdivision regulations so that we can have that discussion at a subsequent workshop. In the document that's attached for this meeting, for this workshop tonight, I did two things. The thing that I was doing before that we are not allowed to talk about tonight, and then on page 3, while I was going through the land and subdivision regulations, I noticed a lot of places where some of the stuff Carolyn was trying to achieve in her draft ordinance or whatever that is. I'll just call it that from now on, Carolyn, sorry. There's a lot of places where in the existing land and subdivision regs where we could maybe do some forest stuff too. And so if we want to talk about that, I'm happy to kind of walk through those items.
Al Diorio, yes, I'd be suggesting that you do that.
Okay. This is Emily again. I'm just
This
gonna
is
go-
Ron, I have a question. This is Ron, I have a question for Emily. When you say page 3, are you referring to
The third page, they're not numbered.
Article 3 procedural overview?
Yes, yep,
Okay,
Yep.
just so I can
So-
follow along with you.
absolutely, yeah. So on page 3 or on the third page, because they're not numbered, there's a long horizontal line and then under that it says purpose. Convey thoughts about how the planning board could use the existing land and subdivision regs to improve conservation of existing forest resources and the document that I'm referencing. And then you're right, Ron, it says Article 3 procedural overview, 3.6.1 project review fees. So basically this is a blurb in our existing land and subdivision regulations, which says that the planning board can impose a project review fee on an application that requires judgment, in the judgment of the planning board, requires review by outside consultants due to the size, scale, or complexity of the project. So, and you can read the rest. I interpreted this to mean we could, for any project, require an applicant to pay for the town to hire like a registered forester. Or
Sorry, you're definitely going far afield. I apologize, but I've got to keep you guys tight. You're talking about changes to the subdivision regulations, fees, and, experts. That it's not the forestation policy.
Maggie, you keep us on the straight and narrow, please.
I'm sorry, I
I don't want
apologize.
you to, I don't want you to feel apologetic about this. You got to keep us pointed in the right direction. That's your job. So back to Carolyn's document. We must stay there. We're going to return to Emily's document at another point in time when we have that latitude. We don't have that latitude this evening.
Some of the things I think you could talk about in regards to the forestation policy. There's my review of it, and again, it was not extensive because the policy was so extensive, and it just seemed to be probably more than what Hopkinton needs based on what I've heard so far. I think you could talk about, would a forestation policy, do we want that to be effective? Like on page 1 of it, it says, for any development greater than 40,000 square feet. That's pretty much anything in Hopkinton is what I'm thinking. Is that really what you intend? Because then later on, there was something in here about, the number of lots, 5 lots or something like that. Is there some threshold if you will. Is it the type of thing where you're mostly concerned with large tracts of land? Or are you as concerned with, you know, a 2-lot subdivision?
Yes, okay, Maggie, this is an excellent approach. So if you can keep us on track with the things that we can legitimately discuss, we can gain some ground here.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, we have had this discussion, and
Okay.
planning board members, please correct me if I'm misremembering. But we decided that the threshold might be along the lines of minor and major subdivisions. So for example, to impose whatever we decide here on a 2-lot minor subdivision might be a bit overkill,
Mhm.
but it might be entirely appropriate for a 6 or 8-lot major subdivision. So that's my recollection. Planning board members, please either endorse my memory or tell me I'm wrong.
This is Ron. That's how I remember things.
This is Emily, me too.
I'm
Al,
on
just
Prevagen. I'm not going to comment.
refresh my recollection, Al. I don't have my regs open right in front of me, but what's your trigger in Hopkinton for major? Is it 6 lots?
Pretty sure it's greater than 5, yes?
Greater than 5, okay.
So to just tack on to that, so here's my concern with, while I think I might have been an advocate for that demarcation, here's my concern.
Yep.
That if protection of our resources is the thrust of our efforts, it's great to focus on larger projects where obviously there's going to be greater potential for destruction of those resources. However, that needs to be balanced against the fact that the theory of the 1,000 cuts. We could have minor subdivision after minor subdivision after minor subdivision, causing as much
Yep.
Damage to our natural resources and never see a major subdivision. So that is my only concern about drawing this line in the sand. I'm not quite sure how to overcome that, but
So
that's
the document actually has something in it, and I forget what page it's on here, and it's sort of like the coastal trigger. So if you have basically a parent lot, I think is what they call it in this document here, a parent lot, that, let's suppose you do a 5-lot now, and 3 years from now, you want to cut off 2 more. That then triggers, because it's the parent lot is going to be further subdivided, that would trigger whatever regulations it is that you're going to incorporate for these larger subdivisions. Coastal does that. If you're in the SAM plan and you do, I think it's the same number. I think it's 5 lots. And then if you go to re-subdivide to get that 6th lot, you now incorporate all of the major requirements that would have been required if you had done it 6 lots to begin with. So you have that sort of a way to control that. The other thing that you could talk about and think about would be whether or not the standards would be different for a cluster subdivision, which you're going to have open space preserved, vis-a-vis a conventional subdivision, which could have a lot of clear cutting on it.
okay. Al Diorio, thanks for that clarification. The issue of the damage by 1,000 cuts, however, I was really getting at the fact that not multiple minor subdivisions on one project, but instead multiple minor subdivisions scattered throughout the community over and over and over again will work against our efforts. And I'm just not sure how to, make that all work for myself. I just have that concern.
That's a tough one.
Anyway, again, just not so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We initially decided that our line of demarcation would be minor and major. Let's go forward from there.
Okay.
So, okay, Al Diorio. So how about we start with this? I have asked this question before. We'll start here again. If the idea is to protect our forested resource, one of the first things has to be, where are they? So an applicant is going to come before us. There are forested resources on their property. How do we start? How do we guide them accordingly? Because right now, they would, if we stand back and look at the process, they would show up with a pre-application application that, as far as I know, does not have to identify any of those resources. So without that identification, how can we possibly consider protecting them? So what's our first move?
Forest stand delineation, identify the assets that are contained in the lands.
Okay, what's the mechanism? Are you going to do that, Carolyn? How do we suggest to an applicant that that is of paramount importance to us?
We make it a condition.
Whose qualification are we going to accept?
You have to have a licensed forester in the state of Rhode Island, or an arborist, licensed arborist. And we do have them. So your developer would be required to bring that forest stand delineation to us, and they would be required to, well, it would be like the opposite of some of the forestation plans we've seen for solar projects. Instead of telling us what they're going to replace, they're going to tell us what is at, what's vulnerable to being clear cutted. So, and one of my positions is that a homeowner that wants to lease a few acres of land to a solar developer, they don't necessarily they don't know what they're leasing. They don't know what they're giving away. They don't know if they're cutting down endangered species of understory or trees. And we trust that a developer is going to be doing the right thing all along, but we have to hold people accountable to some measure. So licensed forester would be required to bring us a forest stand delineation, and then your developer is going to be responsible to tell us if there are critical aspects defined in that delineation, how they intend to protect them. Just the same way that they tell us where the wetlands are.
Okay, Al Diorio. So Carolyn, I'm on board with that so far. Now I'm hearing you use the term solar, but
I shouldn't have, but
we're not. No,
I know.
I'm not chastising. So we're not limiting this to those kinds of developments, though, right? This is across the board.
No. Yes.
Okay. Just want to be clear.
Yeah. And it was those projects that kind of spoke to the things that I thought we needed to cover as a community. That's the only reason why I brought that up.
Understand.
Would you be delineating it by zoning district? Commercial, industrial, residential? Would there be different standards for each zoning district?
I can, this is John. I can make a recommendation. I saw, for example, in Emily's document, contiguous forest. If we define contiguous forest, it doesn't matter what zone it is or how large it is. If we're talking about clear cutting 1 acre of land that connects to 1,000 acres of forest, now we've got a definition that we can work with. If it's 1 acre of forest that's kind of stuck in between a couple of roads, it's not contiguous. Does that help to make some definitions that we can enforce?
Yes.
Just to add to that, this is Emily. in the master plan checklist, there are already some required items that, to speak to John's point, we could just add more specificity to. It does say they must delineate unfragmented forest tracts. So, tracts greater than 500 acres or something like that, we could say. They must identify large or unusual trees, shrubs, or other unique vegetation. That speaks to one of the things Carolyn just talked about. And then this one's kind of tangential: state, regional, or community greenways and green space priorities. But those are already in the master plan checklist. I'm just not sure, do we hold all of our applicants to that? Are we checking our list twice to make sure that they've delineated these unfragmented forest tracts, if that's something we care about? I think we could just be.
Yeah, Emily,
That's something that, this is Maggie Hogan. That's something that you can do on each and every application. That, in fact, that is your obligation as you review the applications, to make sure that that the plans cover those areas because they've been identified as checklist items.
Right. There's
Yeah,
further
this is
in
John.
deep. Oops, sorry, John.
Well, I'll add to that. There are designations in the maps within the comprehensive plan that indicate cultural resources. I have seen applicants come before boards in the past where they say, "Oh yeah, I think there's a salamander that lives over there." So it's a little poorly defined, but that does capture, I think, a lot of the elements that you're describing.
I think
Yep.
Talia had something to add.
So again, this is Talia. So I actually have the land development and subdivision regulations right in front of me right now. And even before the master plan stage, at the pre-application stage, number 12 on the checklist, location of wooded areas and notation of existing ground cover. And then we have number 20, which is existing site analysis map, including topography with approximated contour intervals of 2 feet, locations of significant existing natural and man-made environmental features, including wooded areas, wetlands, steep slopes, rock outcrops, easements on or immediately adjacent to the subdivision. And I mean, you could also probably shoehorn 24 in there, which is general location of any unique natural, cultural, and or archaeological and historic features or sites, including stone walls, trails, and landscapes, as well as 35, which is notation on the plan that the subdivision parcel is/are located within any of the following areas, and one of them is unfragmented forest tracts. So this is just to go off of Maggie's earlier point in that you can ask these developers to, I guess, prove that these checklist items.
So Al Diorio, Talia, thank you very much. That was poignant. 2 points that I'd like to make.
Thank you, Al.
So first of all, whatever we decide to do has to take place at the pre-application stage. Catching someone at the master plan is already too late. Secondly, while I appreciate that we have these things on a checklist, and I bring with me 40 years of working through that same checklist. When it says show the wooded areas, I break out the tree line hatch and I put that on my plan so I can put a check mark next to that box. What's missing is the emphasis on the checklist that these elements are significant to the town and need to be protected. That's the thing that we're pointed toward. It's not that we're not already asking for the information. I'm confident that we do. But what the applicants don't know, and this is not a criticism, there's no way for them to know, is that these elements need to be protected. That's why we want to see them on the plan.
So they give us the information. This is Carolyn. They give us the information, but basically we don't do anything with it. We're just looking for boundary lines.
Well, Al Diorio, it's actually a little bit more than that, Carol. Yes, we're asking for it. Yes, they show it to us. Yes, we acknowledge that it's there, but then they run their proposal right over the top of them because they don't know that they are sensitive and we're striving to protect them. So that's the
Mhm.
missing component. That's what we're trying to get to embed
Mhm.
that emphasis into the regulation. Whether we do that by the reforestation arrangement or some other vehicle, that's what we need to get to. So that the applicant, even before they get to us, don't forget, an applicant has already done significant work before they show up before us. They have to know what we're thinking in order for them to not waste a whole bunch of time and money.
Mhm. I think early on in this workshop effort that we've had, I actually suggested that some of the research I had done at URI and in other communities suggested that the way the planning board handles these things is kind of backwards. We are at the back end of it if we're trying to introduce the concept of no-cut zones, et cetera, to a developer. So I completely agree that this needs to be a preliminary. Am I right?
The application.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things, no cut buffers, conservation areas, open space requirements, they all need to be in your subdivision regulations. An applicant should be able to pick up the regulations and know what they're getting into before they even purchase a piece of property in Hopkinton.
Well, I think for the most part right now they do. But I think what we're talking about is enforcing the identification and acknowledgement that the forest tracts, 5 acres of land with forest or wetlands, these things need to be preserved and conserved. And Maggie, that's some of how we got caught up in the conservation development scheme that we were discussing earlier, because there's a great place for these things to meld together. But at the preliminary, we can ask them to give us their forest stand delineation, give us your plan on how you intend on protecting as much of the native habitats, et cetera, around the property. Just like we do with the wetlands, we can ask them to respect the 100-year-old trees, et cetera.
Carolyn, it's Maggie. I don't think you mean preliminary. Do you mean like pre-application?
I'm sorry, pre-application. Yep,
Okay, just wanted to clear.
that's the age speaking, mind you.
I get you. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Okay, Al Diorio here. Let me just bring everybody back to feet on the ground. It's 6:54. So,
Wow, 1 minute left.
so let's recap. Let's recap quickly. We've covered some good ground. I think please correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think we're queuing up for another workshop with a slightly more, a somewhat more liberal agenda that allows us to tackle some of the topics that we initially touched upon this evening. Are we all in agreement with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those things,
Yes.
Carolyn here. I agree.
those things should include continued discussion of Carolyn's reforestation document to the extent that we need to get into that. And certainly a review of Emily's document, which she prepared for January 2021 workshop. Are we in agreement that those things should be on the agenda?
Carolyn here, yes.
Maggie, do we
Ron,
need,
yes.
thank you. Maggie, do we
Yeah.
need to include any other language to afford us the latitude to talk about the things that we got started on?
I would also add that you're discussing future concepts for subdivision regulations.
Okay, I like the words future concept because we're all clear, right? We're not queuing up to change the regulations, right?
No,
There's a whole